Frequent and fair elections are a quintessential part of democracy. However, some citizens are denied this basic right due to voter ID laws in some states which require state-issued photo ID, an item which many people do not have. My name is Anna LaRoque, and today I'll be making the claim that abolishing voter ID laws would increase voter participation in elections. My three supporting claims are that voter ID laws suppress voters, decrease voter turnout, and discriminate against minorities and low-income citizens. My first supporting claim is voter ID laws suppress voters. Voter ID laws vary all across the country. There are 5 variations of these laws. The first is no identification is required. The second, an ID is requested, but the photo is not required. Third, a photo ID is requested. Fourth, a strict non-photo ID. And finally fifth, a strict photo ID. Strict photo IDs seem like a very simple request, but they are hard to come by. Voter IDs are hard to obtain without the proper identification and papers. A federal court in Texas found that that there were over 600,000 registered voters that don't have the proper forms of identification that the state of Texas now requires for voting. Many of the people that are struggling to have voter identifications are the elderly and the poor, who were born in homes as opposed to hospitals. For these people, this meant that their birth certificates either got lost or they were misspelled in city records. This results in a difficult and time-consuming process in order to fix these documents. This is not just an issue in Texas. This is an issue in states all across the country with these same laws. According to Whitney Weiser from the Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University School of Law, there is an estimated 11% of Americans who do not have government-issued photo IDs, identification cards, such as driver's licenses and passports, meaning that U.S. citizens who are eligible to vote are being suppressed due to their lack of voter identification and the proper identification that they need to vote. My second claim is that voter ID laws decrease voter turnout. In a study led by Kenneth R. Mayer, a political science professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, he led a study on voter IDs and the effects that they had on the 2016 presidential election in Wisconsin. He found that roughly 80% of the registrants who were deterred from voting for voter ID laws and 77% of those prevented from voting had cast ballots in the 2012 election, meaning that if these voter laws were not in place, they would have been able to vote. He also found that the people who faced the brunt of this law were minority and low-income populations. According to an article titled, "So Voter Identification Laws Suppress Minority Voting, Yes, We Did the Research," published by the Washington Post, when overall turnout is compared in states with strict voter IDs versus states without these laws, there's not a significant difference. However, when turnout for minorities is compared, there's a significant drop in states that have voter ID laws versus states that don't. My third supporting claim is that voter ID laws discriminate against minorities and low-income citizens. Studies at the University of California, San Diego found that strict voter identification laws have a differentially negative impact on Hispanics, Blacks, and mixed-race Americans in primaries and general elections. This not only applies to minorities, but it applies to the elderly as well. Anthony Settles is a retired 65-year-old engineer. In his wallet, he carries an expired photo ID, his social security card, and an ID from the University of Houston. Although having all of these 3 things, he does not have the one thing he needs to cast a vote: a current Texas state ID. When he was 14, his mother remarried and changed his name. And after Texas passed voter ID laws, officials told Settles that he would have to show them his name change certificate from 1964 in order to get a new ID card. He enlisted the help of many lawyers with no avail. His only answer would be going to court to get a new document with a hefty price of $250, much more than he was willing to pay. This happens more often than you would think. A similar situation would be the cost and the time that it takes to get a state ID. While the cost may vary state to state, the effort that it takes to get a state ID does not. Not to mention, DMVs are closed on weekends, leaving some people the choice of either skipping out on work and missing a paycheck that they may very much need just to get an ID, or continuing to live their lives without having a valid ID. This leaves many people without the choice of even getting a state-issued identification. In conclusion, those in support of voter ID laws claim that they are upholding the integrity of the electoral process. But is that really true if these same laws are suppressing voters, decreasing voter turnout, and discriminating against minorities and low-income citizens? Thank you.
Gesundheit. And that's your second one. That's it. All right, I think you could identify the controversy a little bit more by talking about some of the stuff that happened in the last election and some of the back and forth that went on between the president and everybody who was talking about voter laws or voting laws and that sort of thing and what the actual numbers were and fraud. I think that would give it a little bit more context and make it a little bit more urgent, but the proposition's clear. You preview the contents adequately. You're signposting in the body of the speech pretty well. I did think that the material that you had on the second point actually fits better on your third point, so I thought that the second point ended up being a little bit thin in terms of proof. Your first point had the stronger information on it. The third point, you're kind of dependent on the one example. There is a statement about how frequently that occurs, and I'm not exactly sure that that information is the same as the information that you had on the first point, which talked about the 11 million people who don't have a voter ID that falls, or an ID that is recognized as a voter ID. So that's a little bit problematic, but I think you had the right idea there. I just think it runs a little short on time in getting some extra proof on that. You did a good job citing your sources for the most part. I thought you had information, like I said, extensive information on Gesundheit. Or wait, is that your third one? You don't get that one. I'm taking it back. Or is that somebody different, Susie?
Someone else.
All right, well then you're entitled. That's okay. I got enough to give around, but you know, no, you can't have thirds if somebody else doesn't get their first and seconds. All right, and I thought that you know, the language is pretty good. I do think you need to deliver it a little bit more, you know, less of the holding the paper and standing there, you know, direct your attention to us a bit more. But I like the language a lot, and I thought that the concluding argument was pretty solid. All right, I think we can get in one more